It's a two pump chump. It rhymes.
I wanted to give him a name, okay? It was alliteration over rhyming for me, okay?
Oh
You
my
can,
god.
leave me the fuck alone. Jesus.
He's a two pump Tim. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of I Finally Watched. This is David.
And this is Alon, and I finally watched The Boat That Rocked.
Which, when it came over to the US, they gave the much more boring, lame name Pirate Radio. So, this came out in '09. I was in law school, or yeah, about to start law school around that time. And I remembered hearing about this movie. And it was called The Boat That Rocked. It was released in Britain first. And I was like, that's such a fucking awesome title. And then it came to the US. I don't remember if it was in theaters or just on DVD, and they renamed it Pirate Radio. And I was like, that's lame as shit. And so I went out of my way to buy the Blu-ray from the United Kingdom so that my copy said The Boat That Rocked, because I'm a fucking nerd apparently. And I also realized, I
Who
guess
knew?
yeah, right. This also is like 25 minutes longer, which I love this movie. So 25 more minutes of it was great to me because this isn't like we do a lot of movies where we talk about this, but this isn't like a plot movie. Like there is obviously a plot to this, but like to me, I just enjoy these characters. Like I like hanging out with them. It's a comedy, so I was like, the more the better. And I don't actually even think I've seen the shorter version of this because it's like it's not streaming. I had to like let you borrow a copy. So, um, but I love this movie. It's like one of my favorites that I like to tell people about that no one have heard of. And I made you watch it. So what'd you think?
Or they heard of it under the different title. So they still have no idea what you're talking about. Well, I mean, when you said that we're going to do this, I knew this was a movie that had like controversy for its title. And when I'm watching it and the title card pops up and it says The Boat That Rocked, I was like, oh, is that the title it changed it to? And you thought that was the lame title, but you thought Pirate Radio was the cool title. So then when I go to look up the cast information about this and I type in Pirate Radio, it's first like, oh, Pirate Radio was a movement in the 1960s about British airwaves and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, so then I'm going to type in The Boat That Rocked. And it's like, oh, the 2009 film. So it's like Google knew it as The Boat That Rocked. And I just confused it by calling it Pirate Radio.
If you go on IMDb, it's called The Boat That Rocked, but then the poster says Pirate Radio. So
It's funny, watching the movie, it says Pirate Radio, but then, like, I think Philip Seymour Hoffman says The Boat That Rocked, and then the boat's name is uh, Rock Radio, right?
yeah, and then I think it says I think Radio Rock, something like that. Yeah, I can't exactly remember. This is based off like a real story, and like I think it was like Caroline was the name of the boat. That there was a bunch of these ships that Radio Caroline was the name of the ship, and there was a bunch of them back then. But the one that sunk was Radio Caroline, and then there's like an amalgamation of a bunch of stories. So it's like they took like some true events and then sort of just made this fictionalized account around it, which I enjoy too. I like when you're just upfront with like, yeah, this is a true story, but not really. Like it's historical fiction. I like the just kind of being upfront with it and then playing with that idea. But with this movie though, it's fairly obvious because of like the representation of the government is one of the funniest parts to me, but it's also like it's just like tweaked a little bit to where it's like, I mean, I guess I could believe the government would do that, but like so cavalier, we're just like, no, those people can die, they would probably do that, I guess.
There's a couple of lines in the movie that I feel like are, how do I say this? Like, that's obviously what the filmmaker thinks of government as a whole. But then I can very well imagine that that is the way the government is, and a lot of people would agree with this thought. Is so one of the lines is when Kenneth Branagh, right, is plays Alice, like the one of the
Kenneth Branagh.
Branagh, yeah, plays one of the Parliament guys. He says something along the lines of, "Oh, you know, twat," which is the name of another character, which is absolutely amazing. He goes, "You know, twat, we're the government, so if there's something we don't like, we can just make a law to abolish it." Right?
Right.
And then the other line is, I think Philip Seymour Hoffman says this, or maybe Bill Nye says this, and he says, I think it was Bill, and he says, you know, it's the government, and the thing that the government hates the most is giving people their freedom. So you know where the filmmakers stand on the government and its ways, and whether you like the government or not, it's true, especially back in the 60s.
Well, yeah, and this is a different one too. Do you know this director? Do you know what else he did? What other movies?
No, what?
Love Actually and About Time.
Oh, that's funny, because I was talking about I was describing this movie to my wife, and one of the things I just said, I was like, you know, there's a lot of people in Love Actually, and she was like, oh,
Yeah, I mean,
British movie.
Yeah, big British movie, right? And the other reason I wanted to do this movie is just Philip Seymour Hoffman, right? Like, I think this part's like almost a little bit beneath him, like a lot of parts are that he's done, right? But he fucking makes it his own so much. He's so great in it. You know, he's like a great orator. So when he's talking, like in the DJ booth or just talking with Carl or whatever, it's always just like elevated because he's doing it. And like I love him in this movie. Like he's just like a dude I want to hang out with. Like obviously I would have wanted to hang out with him, right? But him, and then it's either Rice or Reese Ifans, the guy who plays Gavin. Like
Right.
that section of the movie where Gavin shows up until the end when the boat starts sinking is my favorite part of it. Those two just together are fucking amazing in this, and that's why I love this.
The acting that Philip Seymour Hoffman does when Gavin comes back on board, how he's hurt, and we know why. You know, like that's obvious to us. But the subtlety in his acting, that he's hurt that this guy is basically going to replace him, or so he thinks, is great. And he didn't need to be that good. Like there was no reason to be that good. The whole thing is, like you said, a historical fiction comedy. But everything from when they're climbing the ship's mast and everything like that, and his acting towards Gavin is so layered. But you know, that's just Philip Seymour Hoffman bringing his 100%.
Yeah, and the last thing before we get started is the music. Is like one of the things I love. I love every single song they play in this movie. I think is great, and like the licensing must have been most of the budget for this.
Right. Actually, you know, when I first saw the trailers for this, it was like the music that was it was the music that I was like, oh, I really, really want to watch this. Just the music that they used in the trailer. But I guess it must have been the marketing was so bad, because I'm pretty sure I saw the trailer like once or twice. I was like, wow, I really want to see this. And then it came and went in the movie theater, and I never went to see it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a smaller, especially because it's coming from another country. It's like they're not going to put a ton into the movie and hope it just kind of has a word of mouth thing going for it. So let's get started. One thing we've talked before about like whether going into a movie blind or watching the, one trailer or all three trailers, like what's the most effective way. And what I like about, when I asked you what you thought about the movie, you're like, I liked it, but it's very long. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes. And one thing that makes it feel longer is not really any exposition. They have like the titles in the beginning explaining the scenario and where we're at, like with the British government and pirate radio, which takes a couple minutes, and then that's it. That like so the exposition is handled in that, and then the rest of it is just like full movie, like with everything already explained.
Well, I was trying to explain to my dad what this movie was about, and he knew about pirate radio in the 60s. Actually, when he lived in London, it was during that time. So he knew of the movement very well. And so that part about it was easily explained to him. I was like, it's London in the 60s and it's about pirate radio. And he was like, yeah, okay, cool. And then he was like, but what's the movie about? And I was like, and the best way I knew to describe it was like, there's this kid who comes on board the pirate radio to find his father amongst the rapscallions on the ship. And I was like, I guess that's the plot, but like you said, there's not really a plot beyond, because honestly, the whole thing with the government is so almost like cartoonishly handled and dealt with that that's not really the plot, even though I almost see that as like the catalyst to move the characters in a direction, but the actual plot is just the relationship building that the young man has with all of the different types of dudes on the ship.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean the picture you get of like the British government and the conflict with them is like cartoonish, right? But I mean, the British government did try and outlaw rock and roll music, which is just so funny to me with the music that is like on the radio now or that you can listen to on YouTube. It like that was what we were trying to get rid of. It's just funny like how society keeps going.
Like that was the cross that they were willing to die on. Yeah.
Right. Like this is going to turn it reminds me of like season 4 of Stranger Things. Like Dungeons and Dragons is going to lead the country into ruin. Let's get into it. I love like the beginning of it. There's just so many fucking funny lines. Bill Nye is fucking perfect in this movie. Like I could not think of anyone else to make that character. And I love when he's like Carl walks in, he's like, "My favorite godson. Have we met?"
Well, even before that, when it's just showing like it shows this like little kid in like this strict British household, and he sneaks the radio in his bed, and then it's intercut with like a bunch of kids sneaking the radio in their bed, and then like some night nurses listening to the radio, and then obviously Philip Seymour Hoffman is the best person to kind of jumpstart this whole movie. But then Bill Nye has this like say what you want about Thick Kevin, but as soon as he's like, yeah, my mother sent me on this ship to like whip me into shape. And I was like, yeah, that makes no fucking sense at all.
Thick Kevin. What was that? I guess was he drunk? He's like, yeah, when I have a little bit, I actually get pretty smart. I also
They should call me Clever Kevin.
I also like the continual jokes about everyone knows his mom, and like you come to find out like biblically knows his mom, who is played by Emma Thompson, which I think is probably like the perfect person to cast in that role.
Another person from Love Actually, yes.
Right.
I mean, I love Bill Nye's, because even before we see it's Emma Thompson as his mom, right? Bill Nye describes his mom to him like, wow, your mom is a fox. Like, your mom is so hot. He's like, oh, don't talk to my mom about that. He's like, no, listen. She's your mom, so you see her as your mom. But a guy my age, with a woman her age.
Oh, no, he said she's a sexual legend to people of my age, which is even worse.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's even worse. And then when she leaves the boat, she comes to visit him during Christmas, and she's like, "Tell Mark it was a wonderful night." And he's like, "No."
Great, yeah. Yeah, great. The next part with the game with Thick Kevin, which it's a version of charade. I don't even know what you call it. It's a version of charades, but instead of acting out, you can just talk, right? It's almost like Taboo, that game. But I love nice guy. long hair, had friends, no shoes, and every like fucking Philip Seymour Hoffman is like, oh, I know what it is. Like, uh, at the
My
beginning,
favorite one. My favorite one is just every time he's trying to guess the character, the main character. His name's David
Carl.
Carl. Is it? Okay. Yo, yeah, young Carl, right?
Yeah.
They he was like, why didn't you just said lives in Sherwood Forest and has a bow and arrow? Or like, why didn't you just say he was the son of God? And Thick Kevin's like,
Was he?
was he? I didn't know that.
Well, I love too at the beginning when they're about to play. He's like, "Don't worry, Thick Kevin is just a nickname." And Nick Frost, who plays Dave, just laughs. He's like, "Oh no, it was Chris O'Dowd who plays Simon." He's like, "Yeah, just a nickname."
So yeah, that was a great like character introduction and how like we got to know all the characters very quickly. And then they saved like the two best characters in my opinion. We're introduced to Midnight Mark later on, a little bit outside of meeting everyone else, and he's just a character that's just kind of there for comedic purposes. But he's great. He has a bunch of great moments that we'll talk about. But and then we're introduced to Bob, and it's so funny how no one knows who Bob is because he hosts like he's the DJ for like 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. and he's been on the ship for 7 months, which also makes no sense because of a plot point that we learn later. But everyone's just meeting them for the first time then.
What's the plot point
But
we learn later?
that Bob is his dad.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean any of the other people would have just met him.
No. But what I mean by that is that how would Emma Thompson know about him being on the ship if he was only on the ship for 7 months? You know what I'm saying?
Well, Bill Nye wasn't in that scene, so Bill Nye knew he was there, but all the other people didn't know he was there because he worked what 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. when they were all either, probably asleep or drinking. Or whatever.
Okay, so you're saying that Bill Nye is like longtime friends with Bob, and that's how they all three know each other, and that's how she knew he was on the ship because it probably was like a plan between Emma Thompson and Bill Nye to like introduce young Carl to his dad, right? Something like that.
I guess it just she would have known the information. I don't. It's not the longest like assumption to make on this. The next scene, which is great, is the count when Philip Seymour Hoffman is like, "All right, we took tons of submissions on what I can do on the air, and we've landed on I'm going to say the F word." And he's like, "And if you say the F word, nothing actually bad happens." And this is when Bill Nye comes in. He's like, "You can't do it." And he's like, and the line is, "Governments loathe people being free," which is true. And then he's like, "Okay, we can't do it," and plays a song, but doesn't turn his mic off. And so they just keep saying "fuck" over and over and over again, and you don't know what's happened until the other guy says we're on the air, and then you see like the audience shots of people listening to the radio throughout. I think is a really good idea, and like it made me think this time watching it, like, oh, they must have like. You just get this random person. You're like, all right, now pretend you just heard someone say the F word. Now pretend you just heard someone just got married. You just found out that this DJ that got married, his wife cheated on it. Like, you know what I mean? Like that, the filming of that would have been funny, but that scene is great.
My favorite audience, I guess you would say audience reaction to every time they cut to random people. Well, first of all, it was a really smart move to cut to like the same like 7 or 8 random groupings of people because like I guess those are like the devout listeners. So like when they show up on the boat at the end of the movie, it's way more impactful, right? But the best one to me was the secretary of Kenneth, the politician, right? His character name is Alistair. But anyways, his secretary listening in the beginning, like taking notes on like what all the bad things that they're doing. And then by the end of it, her being like emotionally invested in their journey. It's like, it's a great, like she has probably the biggest arc in the entire movie.
So her name in the movie is Mrs. C. Do you know what Mrs. C stands for.
Is it
Twat's a
cunt?
big. Nah, it's close. Twat's a big clue though. It's Mrs. Clit.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh.
that was like a inside joke that it was what was gonna be her name, and then they cut that, but obviously the C still stands for her. The next scene is when we find out that the girls come every other Saturday. The fucking Thick Kevin's line of "I like having a tiny knob means I can wear tiny underpants." To just Philip Seymour Hoffman,
Philip Seymour Hoffman.
his reaction,
It's like,
don't know what that means. Didn't understand any of that.
yeah, it was great. We were talking about what they could have added for the extra 30 minutes or so that they had for like the Boat That Rock version versus the Pirate Radio American version. But there's so many like small character moments, and there's so many jokes that are genuinely funny, but they also build the character, and we as the audience get to like relate or to know them more. But I could imagine that being like one of the jokes that was like cut out,
Right. When the girls do show up, I love Philip Seymour Hoffman's like, do you mind if I call you by the same name? Twins can be confusing. As like the 3 or 4 guys who didn't get a girl to come to them, and like the lesbian, like just, don't have anyone.
I was so confused I felt like we kept meeting more shipmates that I was like, who's that guy? Who's that guy? And then it occurred to me, it's like, yeah, we meet all the DJs and we know all the DJs. And then there's like the guy who gives the news and the weather. And then there's the guy who does more like the technical aspect in the studio. But then there's the entire like actual physical crew, like,
To run the boat.
I was going to say piloting the ship, but that's not what you call it when you do it to a ship. Crew captaining the ship?
Sure.
Okay. So there's that crew, right? And so when we meet people from that side of the boat, I'm like, I don't even know who that is. But then I caught on.
Right. And then we get probably the scene that aged the worst, wasn't great in the meantime. And
I was
like,
gonna say, did it age the worst, or was it just never good?
I think in watching it the first time, I was like, yeah, that's not cool. And also Nick Frost plays like probably his douchiest character I've ever seen. Like I have many things to say in the end about him. Like, so we'll get to that. But he basically has was it Gemma Arch? I can never say her last Archinen. She's the girl that comes to see him, and he basically tells Carl, "Oh, we'll turn out the lights, and you can sleep with her." And it's played as a funny scene, and it is a funny scene if you keep out of your mind that this is basically rape.
Well, it only works because nothing ever happens, and he gets exposed before anything can happen, right? Like if even the smallest thing, if they went too far in one direction, the characters would almost become irredeemable.
Right.
And you're not really supposed to like Nick Frost at all. Like he does these things in this movie that you're just like, if anyone's like a worse villain than the government, it's Nick Frost's character. But you're actually supposed to like young Carl. And if he like, you see what I'm saying? If he did the thing that he was going to do, then it would have just been like a pointless, like, we just would not like him.
Right, and I mean, I think it gets taken out of his hands because he was probably going to do it. Like, the lights get turned on very quickly. The one line I do love from this is when she's going to dry her hands and Carl's under the towel, and he's like, "No, I love a girl with wet hands." She's like, "You are weird, aren't you?" Also, too, she looks at him like, not to like fat shame him, but he is like the biggest I've ever seen Nick Frost, and she was like, "You are beefy, aren't you?" And he was like, "Am I?" Like looks down at himself, and then Carl is like a third of his size.
Yeah,
I don't know how that was supposed to work.
Well, it wasn't, right? Oh my god. Yeah, I was just like, the entire time I was watching this scene unfold, I was just like, how are they going to retcon this? How are they going to make this right. But yeah, like you said, he gets exposed, and I love the line delivery where he's like, wrong room." Uh, yeah, and then everyone sleeps with everyone except for, like you said, like the three or four guys and the lesbian, and
Yep.
then they leave.
They leave and we meet Smooth Bob for the first time, and I love everyone's like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "I'm Bob." Um, and he's like, "Well, I guess I'm doing a lot of drugs," and they all shake their head like, "Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense." And he's like, "And you got to listen to the music. You gotta stay in it if you're gonna give people what they need." And it's like really like sets up the end when he like won't leave his records as like the boat is filling with water. And all of them are like that too, though, like diehards that just love music, right?
Yeah,
If
yeah.
my house was burning down, though, I would leave all these DVDs, like, just they're replaceable. Well, the DVDs aren't, but I
Oh
could get them.
God, if my house burned down, do you know how many like collecting like collectibles I'd have to? You know how quickly I would die trying to save all my collectibles?
Especially that Elijah Wood poster. Um, there is like so the British government decides that they're going to make advertising illegal for the pirate radios, and it's like, oh no, this really big plot point. And then pirate radio is like, oh, we're going to bring Gavin back, and then you go back to the British government. They're like, oh well, fuck, they're just going to pay from abroad because Gavin's back. It's like, oh, so that plot point didn't matter. I do think the way the British government is handled like they're brought in like every 5 to 10 minutes and they're not actually doing anything because it's like we really only want them to do something at the very end for like the climax, the build up to the climax, to the ship sinking, to it, that. And so it's like the rest of it is just it's like comedy, but it's like unnecessary, I guess. Like they
Yeah,
don't do
I
anything,
mean,
nothing happens.
no, no, but I think it's kind of just fun seeing them try and failing every step, right?
Right.
Like that's the entertainment value in it. And
Right.
then the fact that one of them is his name is Twat with two T's, and how Alistair keeps calling, he's like, "Good job, Twat."
No, yeah, definitely. He also like he plays a douche in this movie, although he is like a little bit redeemed in the end when he's like, "We need to save them. They're gonna die." And Kenneth
Are you talking
Branagh,
about Twat?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
twat. But like he plays kind of an asshole in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies too, right? He's the British
yeah,
guy who's supposed to marry Keira Knightley. So, um, Gavin shows up. PSH isn't mad about it. And I looked it up. It's Reese, is how you pronounce that apparently. Reese Ifans is so good in this movie. I'd say like him and PSH are kind of neck and neck, and obviously they're given the parts to be good. But he's so fucking good in this movie. Like when he shows up
well,
in
they
this.
they made such a big deal about him coming on board, and they did the thing where he like slowly rises and the camera slowly pans up, and I was like, oh, is it played by someone like really fucking famous, like really fucking famous? And then he comes up on the ship, and I was like, I have no idea who the fuck that is.
You clearly, it's because you didn't like football, so you never saw the replacements with Keanu Reeves and Gene
That's
Hackman.
true. I have never seen that movie.
That's we're gonna do that one. My dad like didn't want so the replacements. A little explanation is in football they had the players go on strike, so they brought in scabs, but also the cheerleaders went on strike. So in order to fill the cheerleader spots, they brought in strippers. And so in one of the scenes, they're like dancing very seductively, and my dad's like, "I don't really like you kids watching this movie," and I was like, I've seen a lot at this age, Dad, already. Like this is like the least of your worries. Of like, I have a computer in my room, so like, calm down. Um, but that's one we'll do eventually.
Yeah, I was watching this thing on Instagram earlier, and it occurred to me. I was like, you know what? I've never seen The Sixth Sense through and through, like all the way through.
That's a good one,
I mean,
even if you've had it ruined for you.
yeah, obviously I've had it ruined for me. I live in the world, so
Next, Marianne shows up, and this is like the thing I kind of want to talk about the most. And let's just talk about it all right now. So
all right, let's lay it down.
first of all, Bill Nighy has brought his niece to bang his godson, Which, as a sexually progressive rock and roll Brit, I guess makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's not his daughter, right?
Even if it
Like,
was, it
he's
seems like
just
he'd be like, whatever.
he's he's just trying to do a nice thing for Carl. So
And without even shaking her hand or exchanging any pleasantries, Carl leaves the room to go get a condom, which is like, just wait.
so to talk about this scene, we have to talk about the emotional ups and downs that this scene takes you. Like,
Right?
it takes you on a fucking roller coaster. Because at first you're like, he goes and gets the condom, and you're like, oh, okay, well, they wouldn't set this up unless he's going to get laid. And she's smoking hot, right? So you're like, good for him. And then uh, Nick Frost comes in to like meet her, and he says, oh, no wonder. No wonder you wanted to borrow a condom. And then you know it's just going to go all downhill. And then it works out for him because he's a good kisser, I guess. And then
Well, it wasn't that.
you're
It was he threw away the condom and was like, "I want more than just sex from you." And she's like, "Oh, well then now you get sex because you wanted more than sex."
I thought that, yeah, okay, I guess.
The one thing my favorite line in the entire movie is from Gavin when he goes and gets the second condom because David Frost is like, "Oh, I don't have another one," which is total bullshit, obviously, or maybe not. Maybe Frost is even a worse person than we thought. And he goes to Gavin and he's like, "Hey, and when you're done with it, run it under the tap, rinse it out, use it again."
Yeah, everyone in this ship has their bad qualities about him. Yeah, but when he goes back and she's not there, there's this editing choice that he like turns around in slow motion, and it's like his voice is like echoed. It's like, no, no, no. And then he opens Nick Frost's room to find naked Marianne.
And yeah, which is where it's like it almost just like doesn't make sense. It is established that she's like a fan of Dave's who's played by Nick Frost.
Yeah, but he's not like fucking making the music.
And like he said, "I'll be right back." So it's like, why are you hiding? Like you were obviously going to get caught. And then at the end of it, at the end of the movie, Dave's like, "I feel bad because I slept with your girlfriend twice. Okay, 3 times if you count that." So it's like she slept with him, was in the middle of fucking him, gets caught, feels bad about it. Carl leaves, she finishes, and then sleeps with him again, and then sleeps with him again, all in the one night.
Unless he's like a two pump Tim, and he had sex with her the 3 times in the minute and a half that he went to go get the condom.
A 2-pump Tim?
A 2-pump Tim. Only because I couldn't think of another name that began with T.
It's a 2-pump chump. It rhymes.
I wanted to give him a name, okay? It was alliteration over rhyming for me, okay?
Oh my god.
Leave me the fuck alone. Jesus.
He's a 2-pump Tim. Anyway, so then all of that is like, I don't know about you, and just to make this clear, there's no issue with Marianne sleeping with whoever she wants. But then don't come back to me weeks later and be like, "I made a mistake." Because no, Marianne, you didn't make a mistake. You did it 3 times. Maybe the first time was a mistake, but the next 2? This is the question. Do you take Marianne back?
Okay, so Marianne is played by Tallulah Riley, right?
Yeah.
So yes, of course you take Marianne back. Did you know that Tallulah Riley, I think she used to be married to Elon Musk?
He's been married to like everybody. It's just like
Yeah,
he's been
that's
involved
true.
with everybody.
Yeah.
I can't. Here's the thing. Like maybe you take no. It just doesn't make sense. Like, just I can't
You're
be with.
so upset about this.
I just can't be with someone who's that stupid because it's like I'm gonna. How many more times am I gonna catch you cheating on me, right? And it's like they weren't together, but it's like I mean, come on, what do you like? You just said go get a condom, and in the midst of me finding a condom, you fuck another dude.
I agree with you. Okay, I just looked it up. So Tallulah Riley was married to Elon Musk from 2010 2012, and it looks like they got a divorce and then they remarried between 2013 and 2016.
And then I have no problem with him sleeping with her because it's like, you know what? Why not? But then you find out after that she fucked Dave 3 times, and presumably after she got caught by you, she didn't even feel bad and fucked him 2 more times.
Wait, when did we learn that?
At the end, Dave reaches down and saves Carl and Bob from drowning. He's like, I feel bad because I slept with your girlfriend twice. Okay, 3 times.
Unless he's a 2-pump Tim, and he did it all in the minute and a half that he went to go get a condom. Also,
I don't think he has the ability to recover to do it 2 more times. So let's just presume that she got caught and slept with this guy 2 more times. She is a bad person. That's my whole point. Marianne is a bad person. Carl can and should do better.
okay.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.
But Tallulah Riley is very hot. I agree with that. So, moving on, the scene where Chwat goes to Kenneth Branagh is like, "Oh, we have them." There was a fishing boat that issued a distress signal, and they couldn't be heard because of pirate radio. And Kenneth Branagh's like, "That's awesome. Did the fishermen die? No, they lived. Too bad." Like the willingness to have people die to just get the thing you want is so government.
Is so government. There's a lot of mention of like different metaphors between like every time the government officials talk. There's rope mentioned a couple times in a different context, and when Twat goes up to Kenneth and he's like, "Oh, we don't have them" or something like that. He's like, "But what's better than that is a noose."
I think what you said, they were looking for a loophole, is what they're looking for.
A loophole, that's what it is. A loophole. He's like, "Oh, we don't have a loophole."
I didn't find a loophole, but I may have found a noose, and it was the fisherman.
Yeah, and then he said, "Oh, I love rope."
The scene where Twat and the 200 fans get on the boat is hilarious. One, for like when Bill Nye is like, there's like a lot of people missing here, and then he goes into Mark's room and it's just like, this is only in the British version, but just 40 or 50 naked women in there. So it's a great scene for many reasons, obviously. And also when Bill Nighy finds Twat down in like the brig of the ship or whatever. I don't know ships. And he's like, "What are you?" He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, the door was, I got lost." He's like, "Well, I don't see how that's possible, seeing as how the door said do not enter." And he's like, "I'm a pretty good judge of people, and I think you're a twat." And just screams at him to get out is a great scene.
The DJ Angus,
played by Rhys Darby.
Yeah, played by Rhys Darby, is it's 2 Rhys's. Must be a popular British name.
Rhys Darby's from New Zealand.
Must be a popular English name that colonizes other countries' names.
Except we were like, fuck that. We'll spell it different.
So Angus looks into the sea of naked women that Mark is surrounded by.
Yep.
And he's like, "Hey, any of you want to come to my room?" and they do like the most disgusted face. And then he like points to a woman in the back. He's like, "How about you in the back?" And she's like, "Ugh, no."
Yeah, it's great. He is so funny. I actually saw him like do stand up one time in Bonnaroo. He's hilarious. So next we get the scene where Chris O'Dowd, who plays Simon, is getting married to January Jones, who looks great in
When I
this
saw
movie.
January Jones, I had to look it up. I was like, no way is that January Jones. And then it is. It is.
It is. I think every possible British person they could get for this. Um, I love the line from Simon when like he's like, "Yep, my wife is calling on the boat," and the Felicity, who's a lesbian, he's like, "Hands off, you lesbian!" to her for no reason. Um, and then they do the stag, which is just like a very funny montage set to music, and there's nothing really of importance in it, but I love that scene too.
It's fun. I do have to say, January Jones is American.
I don't care.
Okay.
As I was saying it, I was like, I'm pretty sure she's fucking American, but I was like, I'll just keep going. I was like,
Yeah, I mean,
I was very confident too, and I was just like, I'm gonna say it, and whatever. Moving on.
so yeah, I think, you know what, honestly, the stag party, as we were talking about it, is probably the biggest thing that was cut from the American version. I don't know for sure, but I feel like if anything was, I mean, there's 30 minutes of that movie gone, right? And I feel like that had been it, but it's actually one of my favorite parts of the movie. Um, it has like so many funny things, but then the follow up to the next day where the interaction between young Carl and thick Kevin, where Carl is like, "Oh, I think I had too much to drink," and that's when you get the line from thick Kevin. He's like, "Actually, you put a couple in me, and I become like quite smart."
Sharpens my mind.
And then that's where the conversation where Kevin thinks that the only reason Carl is put on board this ship is not to like get rehabilitated from his like bad behavior, because like I mentioned, that makes no fucking sense, but is to be reunited with his father. How he words it is weird too. He's like, "Oh, you're supposed to be reunited, like a man," or how do you say it? "A boy of your age. It's a good time to be reunited with his father." I was like, 17? Okay.
Well, it needed to happen some point. And then we get to the wedding, and I think this is done really well. There's like one shot where you've shown Gavin, Rhys Ifans, kind of gives a look when he knows it's January Jones of like, ah, fuck, really? And it's also very sad for Simon. What's interesting, I didn't remember that she was like, I met Gavin a week before you, and he wouldn't marry me, but he said, oh, the only way you can get on the ship is to marry someone. So she's like, so I chose you. And I was like, Chris O'Dowd plays a very like good sad sack in this, like someone who you just feel really horrible for.
Well, his acting in that scene when she's breaking him the news and his eyes just become this like sad, but they go from like willfully trying to hold it together, and he's great in this.
Also, like, she's like, we will be having sex right next door, so you may hear us. And he's just like, how could you be so cruel? The next bit is so funny because Philip Seymour Hoffman has been waiting for a reason to get Gavin, right? And this is just like, as he says later when they're climbing up things, he's like, I don't even like Simon.
Actually, if you notice, the way that young Carl gets over Marianne because of what Nick Frost did, and then in the same way, Simon gets over January Jones because of what Gavin did, is through it's through the other people on the board trying to cheer them up, but ultimately it's through music. And I think that's another thing that they always try to bring this back through, like the power and healing of rock and roll.
Honestly, every fucking song in this is a banger. No, there's no filler, all killer. The scene too where he's like, when the Count is like questioning Gavin, he's like, listen, I told her it's not on, and I made her leave. like, I don't really see how this is my fault. And then Simon is like, okay, but did you have sex with her? He's like, just one little pop. Thought it was the least I could do. They're all just like, oh, come on, man.
But it was the morning that she left too. That's the thing. Is that
In his
oh
defense,
man.
though, who among
No,
us?
no, no. I I I know, man. They have some yeah, they pulled some very attractive women for this film.
Yeah, yeah, they did. Philip Seymour Hoffman declares war, and it's the game of chicken. It's just one of the funniest scenes in the movie. Like how out of shape Philip Seymour Hoffman seems as they're climbing up, and then he like starts to back out, and this fucking Gavin's like, I smell, I smell chicken.
Zoom in on Philip Seymour Hoffman's eyes as they narrow, and then he gets the will to keep going. I want to know how they shot this scene. Did they use stunt doubles? Was this CGI? Is it a green screen? Obviously, they didn't jump from the ship's mast into the North Ocean, but
That's how Robert Shaw would have done it.
never. I love the realism in that too, because jumping into like from that height, it's not just like you jump into like what feels like a box of cotton balls, right?
Feels like cement.
It feels like cement, and especially the way they did it, it's like feet first. So the fact that after they both jump in, and it's like this joyous moment, it's cut to them both back in the studio, and then you realize with Philip Seymour Hoffman, he broke like a whole arm, and half of his face is bashed. And then I love the reveal of like Gavin, his whole leg is just shattered.
Yeah. Well, and two, like they make it seem at first as if nothing's wrong with him, but then like the way he kind of makes up a Simon and Simon smiles. There was like some of my favorite lines though in them climbing up. First of all, Philip Seymour Hoffman saying, "Hope she was worth it," and Gavin's like, "She definitely was." And then Bill Nighy, as they're climbing up, he's like, "All he did was have sex with someone's wife. Like, what are we doing here?" And finally, Philip Seymour Hoffman, as he's trying to climb over, is like, "Why am I so fucking fat?" It's like makes me die laughing.
Oh man.
And then right after this too, the like when they throw Rhys Darby into the ocean and or into the sea, Philip Seymour Hoffman's line of like, "Oh, you throw a baby in it, it naturally floats. It's a beautiful thing." Like I thought this would be like that. It was so good. Like it almost seemed like ad libbed.
I I was really worried at the end of the movie when the ship was sinking if they were just gonna forget about the whole part where Angus can't swim, and the fact that that they took that into account. I really appreciated. Like the movie pays attention to itself, you know?
Right. Another like small gaming scene that I think is hilarious was the Never Have I Ever scene where they do it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The first one, like I've never had a fantasy about a member of the royal family because Philip Seymour Hoffman's like the only American there, besides January Jones. My apologies. And then the lesbian never had sex with a man, and they're all like, they all raise their head. She's like, "Oh shoot, didn't think that one out." Except for Rhys Darby, who's like, "I was in camp. We've all done. Who hasn't done it?" And they're all like, "Well, all of us. We just didn't raise our hands." But the funniest one is like how specific Gavin's is. Like, I've never been in bed with the love of my life and tried to fart, and it wasn't a fart, and I shit the bed. And Nick Frost's face as he's saying it, just like, "You motherfucker."
And then the follow up to that joke is when Gavin's on the radio and he's like, "So we're not gonna tell him that I told all of you guys the poop joke or the poop scenario." What is Nick Frost's character name? I always forget.
It's Dave. It's what you thought Carl's
Dave.
name was.
Okay.
The mom shows up, and she shows up for Christmas. We get the whole Bob, tell your mom Muddy's Waters rocks. I love this Christmas juxtaposed with Kenneth Branagh's Christmas, and some incredible casting on Kenneth Branagh's wife, who is the most British looking human being I've ever seen in my life. And then when they do like the cracking thing and like the popping thing, and she's like this as they pop it, and she's like, "Oh, oh my! I think that's enough for the like." She's just like she's gonna have a heart attack.
The the line where Bob tells him, say this to your mom, um, I knew right then and there. I don't know if like the first time you watching this, like you knew right then and there, but as I was like, they wouldn't put this like meaningless interaction between them unless if he was his father, you know?
No, yeah, I think that's obvious. I mean, I saw it 13 years ago, so I don't remember. But um, as I said, that's like the perfect person to play the mom. And I love at the end when he tells her that line, and she's like, "He didn't tell you, did she? Did he?" And she's like, "What? Oh, you slept with Bob? When did you sleep with Bob?" And she's like, "How old are you?" And he tells her, and then
Yeah.
she's like, "Oh, 9 months more than that."
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Which is like, honestly, he was very upset that it was Bob, and she tried to explain to him that he was like a very attractive man back then. Let me tell you, out of all of the men on that ship, Bob is the best case scenario to be your father.
Yeah, it just seems cool. Just like chill, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Bill Nye is not bad. Dave's the worst.
But
Clearly.
it's not going to be Dave, and like Kevin said, it's obviously not him.
It could be that dude who like runs the ship, the guy whose name we don't ever hear. It could be that guy.
It could be that guy. Yeah.
So he tells Bob that he's his dad, and Bob's just like, "Oh well, shit. I don't know what to." He basically doesn't know what to say at that moment. But then it's like, I was like, I thought this was a sweet moment, but then we sort of get a sweet moment later with them, which is cool. The British government then outlaws pirate radio, and I was just like, I mean, as crappy as the British government can be, you can't outlaw something that's like outside of your jurisdiction. I thought that was the whole point of pirate radio, and I was like, so you can't just straight up make something illegal that you don't have any control over. So I actually looked it up, and what they did in real life was they outlawed anybody providing goods or services to the pirates from Britain, which does create like a
Mm.
very logistical problem for them. So that was what happened in real life, and then some of the ships did have to close down. But I read other ships like stayed active until the 80s. So you know,
Yeah. Well, I mean, like even in the movie, even when they were like quote unquote forced to shut down, it was just like I love that scene too where they pretended to shut down
yeah.
and all the politicians were like in celebration and stuff, and then they were like, just kidding, motherfuckers, and everyone else cheers and they're so upset. And
Well, Kenneth
oh,
Branagh
that's
Kenneth,
what yeah.
Kenneth Branagh starts taking the drinks back. He's like, "These are celebratory drinks. We can't celebrate anymore."
I love the running. I don't know if it's a running joke or a gag or what you would call it, but every time Kenneth thinks things are going his way, and then every time those things are like retcon, like pulled back, he's like, "A noose, my ass." He's like, "My ass."
He just says, "Ass, ass." Yeah, no, it's good. I also one of my favorite lines is like from Philip Seymour Hoffman. It made me so proud of. I'm an American citizen and I don't care about your limey British laws. It's like I'm gonna do what I want. And then
Yeah,
Mark stands up and continues his saying nothing, but everyone knows that means he's in too, which is really funny. And also Reese like standing up, he's like after Philip Seymour Hoffman said he was going to continue to play, he's like, I don't know, sounds a little boring and repetitive. I guess I'll have to stay too. Yeah, that whole scene is great. And then Marianne comes back.
fucking bitch.
I'm just saying, like, you sleep with her, that's fine, but this can't be the woman you marry, Carl. Like, you have to have more respect for yourself, someone that respects you. I do like the radio station, like, standing outside, I think is hilarious. And then they're like, just tell us if you had sex. And remember, I'm not answering that question. Is a yes. And he's like, I'm not going to answer that question. And like the fact that like the entire like Britain population that's listening to this starts cheering and is happy for Carl, like it makes the movie better to me. Like this, like that they're all in it together. I think is really cool.
Yeah.
And then the lesbians come out in the other room, also hilarious.
Honestly, when the lesbians had sex, I felt like that was a more triumphant moment than Carl having sex. I felt so bad for her because like she's the only woman on this ship full of dudes. She's a lesbian, and I think from like what we learn about her is that she's never had like a relationship with a woman. Um, so she's like not just sexually deprived, but she's just like deprived of like that special connection. So like when she found someone, I was like, I don't know, I was way happier for her than I ever gave a shit about Marianne and Carl.
Well, Marianne's getting it all the time, so you don't have to worry about Marianne.
That's true.
I like when Bill Nye's like, "Oh, I got an idea," and they move the ship, and then a fishing ship goes in their spot, and like the government comes up there, and there's nothing happened. But then like, so they set sail, and then like immediately start sinking, and like from here on, there's like 30 minutes left in the movie, and like they're starting to sink, and Bill Nye immediately is like, "Don't worry, the government won't actually let us die," and it's like, "Oh, yes, they will."
My favorite line in that whole sequence is when Bill Nye is like, I have good news and I have bad news. Is like the good news is that we're all gonna die. It's like, how's that the good news? What's the bad news? It's like, well, I didn't tell you how we're gonna die. And he's like, well, how are we gonna die? It's like, we're gonna drown in the cold, freezing ocean.
Right. And they all are in this one area, and then they're like, who's on the radio? And they're like, oh, it's silent. And Philip Seymour Hoffman's like, well, fuck that, and like goes and starts playing. We get the scene where he finds Bob. Carl finds his dad, Bob, and like brings him to the surface. We already talked about that. But I like the callback when they're all going to start going to the top of the ship, and Gavin's like, yeah, we should probably head up there. And he's like, okay, chicken. And Gavin's like, laughs and is like, okay, but I'm really leaving. And then the other guy leaves, like looks at him. He's like, Harold is his name in the movie. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna go.
There's two parts of this scene that I won't say I like. Well, I like one of these. So the part that I really thought was funny is when Carl goes to get Bob, right? And that's when he's like, I'm gonna get my dad, and that's like the whole like everyone takes that really well. I don't know. I wish that was kind of more of a reveal that everyone kind of stewed in for a little bit longer, but he goes and gets Bob, and then Bob is difficult about leaving all his records behind. He chooses one record. He finally gets it to the surface, and Nick Frost is just like, ugh. It's like, what? He's like, this is shit, and throws it back into the water. And I was like, oh my god, they almost fucking died because of that record, and it's just all for naught. Hilarious. So that really works. The other thing, too, is that as soon as you realize everyone else is going to be saved, you realize, A, either Philip Seymour Hoffman is going to live, which kind of takes out the urgency of you thinking, like, oh, maybe he's dead. Or two, if he dies, his death is meaningless because it's not necessary for him to die. So for me, I was like, I don't know. I think kind of faking out his death was pointless.
Yeah, it didn't need to be done. And I remember watching it again. I was like, I know he doesn't die. And it wouldn't have, like, you can't end such a joyous movie about the love of music on like a death that doesn't need to happen and probably didn't happen in real life.
Exactly.
If you were trying to make it more dramatic and it's something that really happened, you could do it. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, it's not going to happen. Also, before they get rescued, with a couple of lines is one, they're like, Mark, what's your secret? He's like, just say nothing. And they're like, what? It's like, yeah, just say nothing. And then when the tension gets high enough, just say, how about it then? And they're all just like, how about it then? What
the I guess the last joke of the film is when all the boats are coming to save them and they all jump in the water to be rescued. There's a boat that says anyone but Angus. I thought that was just cruel.
Well, I like Simon's too. He's like, "Oh, there's a boat. There's two boats," and they're like, "Are there more than three boats?" He's like, "It's ever so slightly more than three boats. I think it's called a fuck ton of boats." And then yeah, like it's cool because like they do like once again why Philip Seymour Hoffman couldn't die in this is because you have like a boat there for Angus for some woman who's in love with Angus, a boat there for Simon for someone who loves Simon. Like everyone has their boat of like these people that love their specific DJ. Um, it's like it just like you can't have the sadness with that ending. But and then Philip Seymour comes up and just like rock and roll. It's just like classic.
There's a joke in there somewhere where each boat is its own fan club, right? Of like the specific like they ship them, right? That's that's the joke.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I end this on such a downer.
The brief explanation about what happens to like rock radio afterwards, and like we see like a whole bunch of albums. I thought that was cool. I thought that was a cool way to end it.
Right. Well, too, and there's like a little bit of like jokes here and there too. Nick Frost at one point when he's talking to Penelope is like, or sorry, Felicity. It's just like, yeah, if you weren't a leather, like she'd want him, right? Um, but yeah,
I mean, maybe everyone seems to, so maybe.
shockingly so. Fucking marry him, man. I love this movie. I haven't watched it in a good bit, and so rewatching it again was really like just enjoyed it. It's I think it's got a cool story. It's like got this historical bent to it of something I didn't know about, and like the music is so great, and I just think it's hilarious. Honestly, like all of these British people are so funny in it. British, New Zealander, Philip Seymour Hoffman's American. You get what I'm saying? Like it's just all so great. Um, I love it.
I agree with you. And everything happens for a reason. And so I think the reason I was never able to see this movie when it first came out, even though I wanted to, I'm glad I saw it now and we're able to talk about it. Because if I saw it back then, we'd never been able to do this film and to talk about it to like such an extent. But same thing with Inherent Vice too. Same thing happened to me. It's just the marketing it has a lot to do with like the film, whether it's good or not. And this film just so happens to be great. Let me ask you one final question. If your last name was Twat, would you change it?
I wear it proud. Like I'd get my last name emblazoned on stuff. Just have people like, that's ridiculous that you would wear that out. And I'd be like, that's my surname, you cunt. Well, thanks for listening to another episode of I Finally Watched. This is David.
And this is Alon. And I finally watched The Boat That Rocked.